Excellent. I've always loved horses. My husband calls it a disease. He calls it ponyosis. Many of you ever been afflicted with ponyosis, or maybe still are? Yeah. It's kind of a disease you never really recover from. It's that when you were a child and you meet a pony for the first time, you just lose your heart. Well, I lost my heart to the horse world when I was about 6 years old. We went to Wales and we went on a horse trekking holiday. And all of us were given different horses. I have 3 older brothers, and so the horses got bigger and bigger and bigger because my brothers were bigger and bigger and bigger, and I got put on the little pony. And the little pony, his name was Goblin. And I just thought he was the most adorable little pony in the whole wide world. He was chestnut and had a star and a stripe on his face, and he just had attitude. But he had lots of attitude. And I fell in love with Goblin, and when we came home, I begged my parents to buy Goblin for me. It was time, I said. I needed a pony. And my parents thought, well, that wouldn't be so bad, and we had space to be able to put one. And well, they thought, wouldn't it be better if we bought one of the bigger horses, because then the boys could ride, and my mother was also a horse lover, maybe she could ride too. But I had a 6-year-old hissy fit and said that we had to have Goblin. And I've not ever really known my parents to cave much in my lifetime, but this time they did. And we drove half the way to Wales, and the people with the pony drove half the other way, and we swapped him into the different horse boxes, and we brought home my first pony. And very quickly, we all grew to hate him. Goblin could not be caught. We would go out into the field, all 3 of my brothers and myself, and we would spend an entire hour trying to catch the wretched creature. And then, of course, we'd run out of time, and there wouldn't be time to ride him anymore, and so that sassy attitude of his, unfortunately, was his downfall, and we quickly sold him. And so I went to the local riding stable, and I began to ride the ponies there. Big ones and little ones, brown ones and black ones, chestnut ones and skewbald ones, and I really liked riding. When I was about 10, a friend of mine and I, we actually shared a horse for a while. That was pretty good. He was a nice little white pony. I think he was also Welsh Mountain, but much better behaved. And then, well, as I grew up during my teenage years, I really became besotted with the horse world. And I had to go riding. But I wasn't satisfied with just riding in the arena, doing all that pretty English riding stuff. I really liked it when we went out on what was called a hack, which is the English word for a trail ride. Except that an English trail ride usually doesn't involve very many trails. It usually means that we all go in single file down the side of the road, and then maybe we'll go into a farmer's field and across the field and then out onto another road. And we'd go single file down the road, and then maybe we'd go through a little woodland, maybe for about 300 or 400 feet, and then back onto the road again. So when we would go on these hacks, I just loved it when we were in the woods. I loved it when we went across a field. And I would imagine that I was riding in Montana, in America, where I had all of the hills and the valleys, and I could ride for as long and as far as I wanted to, while I was going down the road and through the woodland, back onto the road again. But while I was doing that, I would always make sure that my horse kind of got to the back of the row, so that while I was in the back, I could hang back in my English saddle, I could hold my reins with one hand, and I could really pretend that I was in America. And while I was doing that, my teacher, he would be way down at the front, and he'd look back, and he'd see me, and he'd say, "Hoi, you in the back there, we're not in America now." And I'd have to sit up properly and hold my reins in 2 hands and pretend I was English again. And when he wasn't looking, I'd be back on my quarter horse, riding the trails of Montana. Well, a number of years later, I actually came to America, as we call it in England. And I was so excited. I came here to Washington State and then to Whatcom County, and I looked around and I thought to myself, now here is a place a girl can have a horse. Because of course by then I had grown up from wanting a pony to wanting a horse. And so I went around and I asked lots of people to give me advice on how to buy a horse. And they would give me all kinds of advice. They would say, never buy a horse with long ears, because it's likely to be as stubborn as a mule. They'd say, don't buy a horse that has long teeth, because then it's bound to be a biter. And don't buy a horse that's all sort of hunkered down in back, because it's bound to be a kicker. Well, I'd been kicked, and I'd had a runaway, and I'd been bitten before, and I'd ridden stubborn horses, and I didn't want any of those. So I thought those were really good pieces of advice. All that and never buy a runaway, right? So I looked, and I held to that advice, and I tried this horse, and I tried that horse, but none of them seemed to be quite what I wanted. One day, I was out looking around, out in Whatcom County, and I came down a road and round a corner that I'd not been in before. Very pretty little valley, and it's a lovely little farm nestled down in the bottom of the valley, and it was green all around. It was early autumn, and the leaves were just changing color, and it was so beautiful. And I saw all these chestnut horses out in the field, my favorite color, and I thought, oh, those are nice horses. I think maybe one of those might be a horse for me. So I pulled into the driveway. There was no sign that said horses for sale or anything like that, but I thought the farmer could give me some advice. Maybe they sold horses, maybe they bred them. I mean, there were the mares with the little foals out in the field, so maybe they would know. Well, I drove in, and next to where the mares and the foals were, there was a small little paddock. And in the paddock were just a mess of vines all over the place. It was just a real mess, and the farmer was standing in the middle of all of these vines and big leaves, and he was really making a grumpy looking face. I thought, oh, maybe this isn't a good time to talk to him. But he'd seen me, and he greeted me in a grumpy way. Oh, how can I help you? I said, well, actually, I just saw your horses in the field, and they really are some of the prettiest horses I've seen around here. He cheered up a little at that and said, well, thank you. And I said, they just look so lovely. He said, well, they are lovely to look at, but boy, have they been making mischief. They got into this field, and look at that mess they've made about all of this nest. Well, I looked at what he was looking at, the vines, and everything was all kind of trampled and all, and then I noticed that in amongst the vines were all these round orange things. And he had said that the mares had been here making a mess of the nest, and I put two and two together, and I didn't quite make four. And I was thinking, mares? Nest? Are these eggs? And I looked at him and I said, well, sir, I'm not really sure what you're meaning, but are these mares' eggs? And he looked at me with curiosity. Then his face just lit up, and he smiled, and he folded his arms, and he looked at me, and he said, well, yes, ma'am. He said, them theirs is mare's eggs. You want to buy one? I saw that twinkle in his eye, and I should have paid attention. I was so excited, I had suddenly had this revelation that if I bought a mare's egg, I could hatch my own colt, and I could train it to be the horse that I want it to be. And it wouldn't be stubborn, and it wouldn't bite, and it wouldn't kick, and it wouldn't be a runaway. I was so excited, and of course, I'm a real cheapskate, so I bet it would be cheaper. I said, oh, yes, I'd love to buy one. How much? Well, I probably could hear the cogs whirring in his brain as he said, well, depends on what sort of an horse you want. He said, if you want a big old cart horse, you can have a big one. And I looked at that and I said, oh, no, I don't want a cart horse. He said, oh, well, yeah, that's $100, that one there. And then he picked up a little one, and he said, well, and if you need a pony, then, well, that one's only $20. I thought, wow, that is a bargain, but I don't want a pony. And I said, no, just a nice medium-sized riding horse is what I'm after. And he said, and we looked around and we found the perfect one. It was about this big, and it even came with a green handle on the top. See, I just took that, I was so excited. You see, you have to understand, I grew up in England. And you grow things here in the United States that we don't grow in England. I'd never seen fields of corn, I'd never seen blueberries. And so, I thought it was a mare's egg. Well, I took that egg and I held its handle and I paid him $50 for it. A real bargain for a nice riding horse. And I took it home with me. Well, I went into my living room and I was so excited. What kind of a colt was going to come out of this beautiful egg? And what was I supposed to do with it? I mean, animals usually keep their eggs warm. Most animals that lay eggs sit on them. And I've never seen a mare sitting on her egg, but I figured no one was around. And so I got a blanket and I bundled it up and I set it by the fire where it would be nice and warm. And every day when I would come home, I'm only telling you, don't tell anybody else. Okay, this is a secret, but I used to, well, sit on it. I figured it would keep it a little warmer, right? And I would do that every evening. And I waited. And the autumn came and went, and Halloween went, and Thanksgiving went on by, and, well, pretty soon it was time to decorate for Christmas. So, well, the egg was in the way. So I picked it up and moved it over. As I picked it up, my fingers slipped inside it. It was all soft and gooey on one end. And I suddenly realized as it dribbled out of my fingers that I had a dud egg. It was a bad one, a rotten one. Nothing was going to come from that. And I was furious. I'd spent all that money and all that time to try and hatch that mare's egg, and it was a dud. Oh, I was so disappointed. I marched outside with that egg. I went down to the bottom of the garden, to the fence at the field where I was going to keep my nice colt. And I took that thing and I hucked it as far as I possibly could out into the field. Right into a mess of blueberry bushes. I mean, blackberry bushes. All with vines and stickers and prickles. And as the egg hit, something shot out of that bush. It was small, and it was brown, and it had long ears, and it was running like crazy. I thought, no, that was my colt. It wasn't a good egg after all. I leapt over the fence and ran after my colt. I'm yelling and calling, and as I'm doing that, I'm taking another close look at it as it's running. You see, it's awfully long ears. And I think, oh, that colt would have been as stubborn as a mule. It turned around and looked at me at one point. And I saw its teeth. It had huge teeth for the size of its head. And I knew that colt was going to be a biter. And did you see the size of its back legs and how it could spring as it went? That colt was definitely going to be a kicker. And because I could see how fast it was running away from me, yep, I stopped running too because it was a runaway. Well, I've lived here in the United States for a good long time now, and I've learned a whole lot more about pumpkins and about jackrabbits. And I've also gotten better advice on how to buy horses. And so 12 years ago, I finally bought my first horse. I still have him, and he's getting a little long in the tooth, although he doesn't bite. He's just getting old. And then I bought a young one, a new one, 2 days ago on Saturday. I'm so excited. But he's young, and I am going to be able to train him up to be just the horse that I really wanted. So if you have ponyosis, don't give up, because one day you might have your pony too.